An epidemic that does not discriminate, an addiction that often has its roots in a small piece of paper we all know simply as a prescription.
The problem of opiate abuse has gained a lot of attention because of Prince's death, and here's Fox 9's Jack Heiberger with a look at why the addiction has grown so much.
It rises above the Minnesota prairie, a monument to something we'll probably never understand. Prince Rogers Nelson was unlike anything we've seen before. The walls of Paisley Park sheltering a genius both beautiful and conflicted. But his problems, at least his final problem, were anything but extraordinary. His addiction to an opioid painkiller, an American cliche, one that plays out every night to a soundtrack of sirens on a stage of flashing lights.
I probably see way more people who are addicted to opioids than I'm even aware of.
On the front lines, you learn opiates don't care. Your race, the size of your paycheck, the street you live on, none of it matters.
It's grossly apparent. It's a problem. It's a palpable problem.
Hennepin County paramedic Nathan Caranda is often the guy who cleans up.
Narcan would work on an overdose on methadone.
The first one to the last scene of a story.
So this is an unconscious patient who's having a reaction to methadone.
That all started in the office of a doctor.
When I was a medical student in the late 90s, early 2000s, this was not as big a concern, and we did not get taught about this. The problem of expanded opioid use for common chronic pain conditions really didn't begin until the late 90s with the introduction of OxyContin into the market.
You were even taught that these are safe. There was research shown to you that addiction was unlikely.
I was taught that these medicines, if given for patients in pain, could not be addictive. We were told that the rate of addiction was less than 1%.
But those numbers, provided by drug companies trying to sell pills, many doctors say have turned out to be wrong.
And I think raises serious questions about the values we place in the healthcare industry. Otherwise, how do you explain this?
Emergency room doctor Chris Johnson now spends much of his time talking to doctors about the dangers of overprescribing.
How many people, in your experience, come in and get an opioid painkiller when they maybe really don't need it?
Need is a tough word. The patient certainly feels they need it. But do many patients get opioids and the opioid is not in their long-term best interest? That happens very frequently.
In March, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention surprised many with its first ever guideline for handing out opiate prescriptions. The CDC recommending doctors avoid prescribing opiates unless absolutely necessary. But in many ways, the damage is done. Since 2006, opiate-related deaths have increased by 40% in Hennepin County, and in Ramsey County, over the same period, fatalities rose by over 70%.
In the year 2014, almost 19,000 Americans died from prescription opioid overdose. That's the deadliest year on record.
Efforts to curb the prescription opiate problem are working, and as the supply on the street gets ever smaller, another problem continues to grow.
At the apartment, you didn't go up to see Nick. But you later found out that when they found Nick, it was pretty clear he'd been on his own. In fact, the needle was still in his arm.
And that tourniquet, I think, was still on.
Laura Moore will never forget the day heroin came home. Her son, Nick, a 25-year-old master's student at the University of Minnesota, had just returned from a rugby tournament. Beat up and tired, she remembers dropping Nick off at his apartment in February of 2012.
And he kind of hobbled up those stairs. And
it was the last time she'd ever see her son.
I'm really glad we picked him up from the airport that time.
Laura thinks Nick turned to heroin to help manage the pain. He'd tried it years before, but was not a regular user. And in the weeks after his death, Laura, like so many before her, struggled to understand why.
The coroner gave me their phone number, and I think I called them, I don't know how many times, but I'd kind of like get my head to one point, and then I think, okay, no. So I keep calling them, over and over.
You wanted to understand.
I did want to understand.
Understanding comes with the knowledge opiate addiction touches everyone. Perhaps there's no better example of that than paramedic Nathan Caranda.
You talk about why I'm doing this or whatever else. This is an opportunity for me to rectify a situation that I was unable to rectify personally.
Before he ever climbed into an ambulance, a 19-year-old Nathan climbed down a set of dark basement stairs where he found his stepbrother Chris dead after overdosing on heroin. But from the darkness of that moment, Caranda's been able to find hope that the opiate epidemic, like all that have come before, can be solved.
If anything, this job has reaffirmed that we're here for two reasons, and that's to love and to help each other. And yes, this is an epidemic, but it's also an opportunity for us as a state and as a nation to come together and fulfill that purpose.
In 2015, opiate-related deaths in Hennepin County decreased by just under 5%, a sign perhaps that the system is fighting back. Then in April, the world came to Chanhassen to remind us just how far we have to go. Prince, like Nick Moore, was one of us. And in the battle against opiate addiction, every life, whether famous or forgotten, is worth saving. Reporting in Minneapolis, Jack Heiberger, Fox 9.